Stuart Rudner here with my turn to Fireway for April 2019. And what I want to talk about today is something that came up in season 2, episode 3 with Hilda again. The concept that employers, and it's a very simple message for you, stop burying your heads in the sand. Stop hoping that things that you know are going to be issues will just go away and that everything will turn out okay, because the reality is it almost never does. We see this all too often. And usually when our firm gets involved, it's because things didn't turn out okay. It's because there are very real issues. And we're now spending time in trying to help you fix the problem as opposed to avoiding the problem. And you know, the old expression is really, really true. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So if you think there's an issue, deal with it. And I know this sounds self-serving. Get your employment lawyer involved. Figure out how to deal with it properly and strategically, which is what we love doing. It's working strategically. Otherwise, you're going to end up calling us when there is an issue and we're going to have to start trying to fix it. And you're going to spend a lot more money. So when I talk about burying your head in the sand, what are we talking about? And I've got some examples here. So let me just go, there we go, I got my notes. Some examples. So one comes out of the topic we talked about in season 2, episode 3, and other episodes before of Fire Away, which is cannabis in the workplace. So you suspect that you have an employee who has a cannabis addiction or a drug or alcohol addiction of any kind. And you know that if you find out for sure, you're going to have to accommodate them. So instead of asking or even giving them the chance to ask for accommodation themselves, you rush and terminate their employment. That's one example. The other example is you've got a long-term employee. They've been a great performer for years. All of a sudden, their performance is slipping. Maybe their attendance is questionable. And you know, or one of their managers or supervisors knows that there's probably something going on there. Maybe it's a mental health issue. It could be a depression issue. It could be, again, an addiction issue. Whatever it is, again, you're worried that if you say to them, what's going on? And they say, I have an addiction or I'm suffering from depression, you're going to have to accommodate them. You know enough to know that you don't want to know. Therefore, you bury your head in the sand and you rush to terminate them. And again, what's going to end up happening in this case, typically, is that they're now going to turn around and file a claim and say that you knew or you ought to have known that they had this mental health issue or this addiction issue. The other situation we see this happening more often lately, we talked about, you know, the Me Too movement and sexual harassment in the workplace. So you have someone who comes to HR and reports that they're being sexually harassed by their manager. And so, okay, you know enough to know we've now got to go down the investigation route. And you start going down that route, and I've seen this happen many times, and then the complainant comes in and says, I can't do it anymore, I quit, I'm leaving. And then I've seen too many employers who see this as a victory. All of a sudden now we don't have to do the investigation, it's a win. And so they bury their heads in the sand and allow that manager to continue managing, knowing, or at least they should know, that this manager is a ticking time bomb. And what usually happens is they harass somebody else. And the next claim you get is not just that they were being harassed, but that you as a company knew or ought to have known that this manager had a propensity for harassment, and yet you did nothing to stop it. You did nothing to protect the employees. Therefore, you've exposed yourself to even more damages. And this is the problem that we see all too often, is that instead of dealing with it and incurring some minimal cost of either accommodating or investigating, you bury your head in the sand, ignore it, and end up paying a lot more in terms of damages. Could be extraordinary damages, punitives, bad faith, and of course, legal fees involved. Again, it's far more costly to fix a problem than to prevent a problem. So when we talk about burying your head in the sand, basically what that is willful blindness. It is choosing not to know something. And when a court finds that you knew, or more importantly, ought to have known, there was enough there that, as Hilda again said in season 2, episode 3 of Fire Away, you had a duty to inquire. If you knew enough to inquire, but you chose not to deliberately, you're willfully blind, courts are not going to be at all sympathetic. And they are going to penalize you even more than you would have been penalized just for the action or whatever it is you did or didn't do. So you've got to deal with the issues as they arise. You can't bury your head in the sand and hope that they go away, because they almost never do. It's far better to be proactive. Update your policies, update your procedures. And this is, again, something we talked about in Fire Away. Make sure your procedures are in place and clear, and everyone is trained on what the procedures are. So request for accommodation or a duty to inquire. You have a supervisor who notices that one of their employees is all of a sudden underperforming, having spotty attendance, and they suspect maybe it's a depression issue or an addiction issue. They need to understand what they have to do, when they have to inquire, and that they can't just ignore it. So we do a lot of that training. We help you do your policies, your procedures, and then we'll come in and we'll help you train your managers and your supervisors, making sure everyone knows what their obligations are and how to handle the situation. So no one is tempted to just bury their head in the sand and hope it goes away, because it almost never does. And it usually ends up costing you a lot more in the long run. So that's my 2 cents worth today, and you got here for free.